I know, right? It's like you can tell it's super hot. I don't even want to wear a hat. At least for this time of year. Usually it starts to cool off, but it's toasty. It's very toasty outside. Well, hello, hello, hello. Let's see here. What can we go over? Today was day 2 at the new job. Uh, they had me running basically like a madman. I barely got time for lunch. From 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. So yeah, hence why things for the stream didn't show up until kind of late. There's tons of meetings and onboarding stuff. A harassment in the workplace training video that was 2 hours. Not really a video, but like all those things. Yeah, and kept me quite busy. But yeah, um, so we'll give a couple minutes for folks a bit. Has evaporation in the tank kicked up? Yeah. I mean, the tank that is the most susceptible to evaporation in my house is in one of the rooms that stays a little cooler. But in the room where I keep all the tanks warm, mostly by room temperature, yeah, top off the flex. I know. I actually did a minor top off of it just because it got way too low, but I was short on time, and so brother-in-law James was helping me. It's not his fault. Probably me miscommunicating directions, because I was like, hey, make sure you fill up the back chambers, because sometimes they don't fill up as much if you only do the front. And that was like a previous time. So I was downstairs controlling the water flow, right? And because we just have a Python, and my sinks upstairs aren't compatible with a Python. Very annoying. Anyway, so I'm down there, and he's like, fill up the back, right? And I'm like, yes. So I think all he did, I think he misinterpreted it. It's like filled up the back chamber and then was like, I'm done. I was like, man, that seems fast. All right, well, we got to run. We got a bunch of errands to do and all that kind of stuff. And then I came in and I looked at it and I'm like, yeah, I need to. It's not really worth me fixing the filter in the Flex because I'm just going to tear it down. It's probably getting teared down pretty soon because I might have a line on a replacement aquarium setup to go here. I'm making a bit of a trade that might get me a nice water box tank from someone. Yeah, we could have like a nice water box setup here instead of my like terrible old VHS cabinet with my Flex on top. But yeah. Okay, so there's that. So yeah, definitely hot. Gotten some more evaporation going on. Yeah, that thing will go. That Flex will be going down. Blake, oh, it's good to see you, buddy. Blake, it's interesting. My new job, I work with several New Zealanders. It's kind of awesome. We have like an entire team of developers down in New Zealand. And one guy was on vacation in Sydney. So like immediately thought about some of my Aussie fish keepers. Oh man. And then I'll answer before I get into the topic, I'll answer one more question that was in chat. Eric Isaacson, what's your favorite bourbon? That's a good question. So, that I own or that I've tried? Because like I've tried William LaRue Weller, and that stuff is incredible. But there's no way I'm gonna own a bottle of that anytime soon unless I get crazy lucky at like a lottery or something. Because they're so impossible to find. And when you do find them, they're like $2,000 in the state of Washington. It's like ridiculous. It's not how much they're supposed to cost, obviously, but when things are crazy rare, prices get jacked up in Washington because Washington is ridiculous. As far as what I own, or maybe more regularly drink, I love Weller Antique 107, and I really, really like Old Forester 1920 as far as like more commonly available things. And then like the larceny barrel proofs that come out a couple times a year. I love those things. They're really good. They punch like a mule, but they're really good. And there's a lot of other stuff that's harder to find that I do like that I own, but we won't get, but that's for another time. Yeah. But yeah, WLW is like easily the best bourbon I've ever had in my life. It's incredible. If you're a bourbon drinker and like you're used to good bourbon, it makes good bourbon taste like it's cheap, and it's crazy. It's just crazy how good that stuff is. Anyway, let's talk fish stuff. Fish stuff's more interesting. I have jokingly said that I should make a bourbon channel, but I would probably only post like a video a month just because I don't want to take away from my time doing fish content, because I love doing fish content. So, preface to the stream topic. Stephen P. Answer is yes. Thanks, Stephen P. Let me give you the preface on this. It's in the description for the replay crew and stuff like that, which replay crew, I love you guys. But for chat, you get to be a part of the conversation while you're here live. I have seen a lot of, and this actually includes the guy that I'm talking with that I might trade for the water box setup. A lot of people in my club lately have been like downsizing, where they're switching from keeping lots of littler tanks more simplistically, breeding more species, to going really to like only one or two typically larger but nicer aquariums. They're trying to like have those one or two display tanks that they really pour a lot of extra love into, and not necessarily spreading it around as much. So they have one or two really beautiful tanks, as opposed to like, yeah, I've got this tank and this and that, and then I'm breeding fish over here and I'm doing that. I've seen a lot of this paring down, and I've noticed it seems to happen in summer. Because there's waves of this that happen in my club like every year. You'll see one person or another that had a lot of tanks pare down. And then often you'll see someone else who's like capitalizing on that and trying to pair their tanks up to get extra tanks. So I wanted to talk about like the two sides of this conversation, right? One or two really nice aquariums versus several simpler aquariums. Oh, an alcohol discussion in my chat today. What's up? Jeez, make me think that I might have to babble about that stuff instead of fish. Oh, we're a fish channel, people. Come on, killing me. I also like Scotch, by the way, but I don't drink a lot of it because I really only like one type of Scotch. Anyway, this is what's random in summer in chat. Just, replay crew, I'm sorry. Focus is out the window. I was up super early, and I have not been getting up as early in my time of unemployment because I didn't really have to. I was getting some extra sleep instead of being in like typical Bentley work mode where it's like 5:30 a.m. I'm awake. Got to get used to that again. So, I want to talk about both these. Like, obviously, we had somebody in here who mentioned, like, I really want to keep, like, one nice or two nice display tanks and a bunch of tanks for breeding fish. And I think that's a lot of us, right? And that's even me. I try to have, like, one or two nicer displays and then a lot of other simpler tanks where my goal is just to keep and maintain my fish and not necessarily, like, really make something very beautiful. Because it's a lot of work, right? It's a lot of work. Chat is all over the place tonight. I love it though. This is great. But we'll talk a little bit about that other stuff too. Oh man. It's honestly, we can talk about whatever you want, but I'll finish topic and then we can go into whatever chat wants to talk about. Because you know me, I don't care. We'll talk about anything. But I want to pose this thought to you because I want to pose it from the perspective of what actually is better for keeping people in our hobby. Okay, this is where I want to lean this discussion. I'm sorry. I'm trying to reach that replay crew. I'm so sorry. Y'all make me laugh too much. So I think in general, having a couple different things and like testing a bunch of different fish out is great for maybe some of our more advanced hobbyists and our really dedicated hobbyists. You know, Paul Soltero, dedicated hobbyist. Blake's Aquatics, obviously, the man's running a YouTube channel. He's obviously a psycho like me, right? We're talking about people, Lady Diane, dedicated hobbyist. These are people who might lean more toward that multiple tank. But let's think about some of our people that are coming into the hobby and they might struggle or not, right? Do you think it is better to keep people in the hobby, or more likely to keep them in the hobby, if they have several simpler tanks where they get to enjoy several different types of fish? Or they're keeping one, maybe two nicer, and nice is in big quotation marks, right? Tanks where the goal is to have this really pretty display that maybe it's an accent piece in their home, and maybe not like the rest of us crazies who are like, oh yeah, that room over there, that's got all my fish tanks in it. You normal people just avoid that. Right? There's definitely those. I've had some interesting conversations with people that do not keep fish and have come over to my home, whether they're friends or other hobbyists. When my refrigerator died last week, I had the delivery guy come in. He like looked over in the room and he's like, "Is that a bunch of fish tanks?" I was like, "Yeah." He's like, "Can I just go in there and look?" And I'm like, "Yeah, go ahead, man." Like, you want to take a couple minutes and just glance around and go for it. It's like he asked me a couple like quick questions before he was taken off, and you know, those are the kind of things that I think about. I think, of course, it's going to depend on each individual person. I think you're going to see some hobbyists who get into it where like maybe they have kids and the kids are interested in a couple different types of fish, and you might have the one tank in the kid's bedroom and maybe got one in the living room, or maybe it's toward the kitchen or something, right? And maybe you have a couple of smaller tanks throughout the house that are each designed for a different person to enjoy, but you keep them a little more simplistically, still try to make them look nice, of course, but maybe you're not going like trying to do some heavy aquascape. And I think you get the people who get into the hobby that love the nature aquarium concept and like that more artistic portion. So they start looking toward that like one really nice display tank. And most recently, the best example I can think of in my head is Tank Tested, right? Alex at Tank Tested, he has that big, beautiful tank that he has kind of in the center of his home, right? And he's really scaled back. He's got a lot less tanks overall nowadays. He doesn't do quite as much fish content also, but you know, that's not what we're focusing on. But he shifted to like one big, beautiful display tank so that he could enjoy his hobby better for him. And I wonder, the question is to you guys, and my thought is this. I think for the hobbyists that have some struggles, it would be easier to have that focus on like one, maybe two tanks versus trying to spread out and like, oh, well, I keep like 6 different strains of guppies and I'm trying to keep tetras over here and I want to keep some plecos. Like maybe narrow it down a little bit, master your skill set, right? Get more used to it before you start expanding. Now, you've got people like Leo who's in chat, right? Sometimes you think Leo might be getting a new aquarium every week. Because Leo's always looking for that next interesting fish and stuff like that. And we got plenty of hobbyists who get that deep in there, right? And this is a good question that I think ties into this, right? Brandon, reverse psychology. Why are hobbyists leaving, and what would make you stay in? Good question. So I think a majority of the hobbyists who leave are for one of two reasons. One, they're really struggling to do the things that they wanted to do in their aquarium. And usually this is they're struggling with fish dying, or they're struggling with keeping their plants alive and getting them to be successful and thriving. For both fish and plants. I can't really talk to saltwater because I'm just not a saltwater guy. But I think that's the most common thing. And the problem is that can be a really complex issue because often you'll have people that are in areas where their only access to fish might not necessarily be the place that is taking the most care in ensuring that the fish are in the best possible health before they're sold to those customers. Usually we attribute this to like big box stores, but that's not always the case. Sometimes you could have a mom and pop pet store that keeps fish, but their focus is more on other things, whether that's dogs and cats, reptiles, birds, whatever that may be. They might not have a really good dedicated set of people running the fish portion of the store. I think that's less likely a case than like what we see in the big box environment, just because of the systems that most big box stores use. But it's still worthy of discussion. Or maybe more importantly, they could be folks like me. And I know you're thinking like folks like you, Bentley, you've gone bat-ass crazy. When I got back into the hobby, I saw all these beautiful aquascape tanks and I wanted to try that. And I was bad at it. Bad. And the only difference might be is they had a similar experience where they maybe they lost a little bit of fish, and not so much fish, but they kept losing plants over and over and over again. And they see, like, whether it's on through YouTubers, not me, obviously, right? Not an aquascaper, but maybe you're watching like Green Aqua, MD Fish Tanks. There's lots of great aquascaping channels out there. And you're seeing these really cool setups, and you can't seem to get the same results. That can be really discouraging. And if they're not like a persistent, tenacious pit bull of a human being like I am, they might very well give up. Or maybe it's on fish. Like I cannot tell you the number of times I have tried to keep cardinal and neon tetras and struggled. There is something with that fish that just like the way that I keep fish, they're like, nope, not happening. maybe it's like I like using things that add too much mineral content. I don't know. But my water's never super hard, so that's where I'm always confused. Because very frequently my water is relatively soft in the grand scheme of things. And then the other thing, like Stephen P is kind of mentioning this, summers get me down because it's so hot that I won't order fish or plants, won't ship them out either. So it just becomes me and my horde of trimmings as I do tepid water changes. And that's another thing. It could depend on the time that you start, right? Or maybe this hobby is very expensive. We all know that. And we're always looking for a way to save a few bucks here and there because the hobby is expensive. And it might be one of those things where you start getting into the hobby. Maybe something happens. Maybe you're like me. Your stupid fridge dies, right? Or your dog needs surgery. Maybe you had an accident and you've got medical costs. And all of a sudden, the things that you need to keep going in the hobby are too expensive. And you need to get out of the hobby and focus on other things. And sometimes I think we'll see people that if they get out of the hobby for one reason or another, they almost never come back. Even if they were having a good experience, if they were kind of like forced out of the hobby for one reason or another, that maybe it doesn't have to do with their enjoyment of fish, that sticks in their brain. And it becomes really hard to get back. Johnny at Dance Fish, I know a place where you can get some hardy cardinals. Stop it, you. Stop it, you. Actually, I do want to do long term down the road. I want to do some cardinals as dither fish in a pleco centered tank, but that's not the short term right now. The short term is keeping all my rainbows because I'm a rainbow psycho, as we all well know. But yeah, I think there's a lot of issues that are difficult to overcome because going from new fish keeper to encounter a problem and understand why that problem happened and how to fix it is a big jump in knowledge, right? And it's easier than it used to be. It was much harder in like the 80s and 90s. The internet has made a prolific amounts of information available. But it still can be really difficult because you can still have people that are like, I can't tell you the number of stories like I followed X and I'm having problems. And even in some of my own stuff, right? I'm not going to say it's like, oh, it's only because they were trying to follow Corey's method or Fatherfish or whoever, right? I've had plenty of people say, hey, I used your light setting and now I'm getting tons of algae. And that could turn somebody off immediately to something because maybe they don't know that, like, oh, you need to tinker with X, Y, and Z for a little bit, get your aquarium to get used to that change, and then it can sit at that for a period of time, right? And that's one of the hardest parts about our hobby. Our hobby is trying to take extremely complex ecosystems, heavily diversify them often, and put lots of things that don't naturally live together in a tiny glass box. You know, what was in this tank several different times, none of it lived together, right? And it's in a 15-gallon tank. And most of these things come from water systems that have millions upon millions of gallons of water. So inherently, we are fighting nature to an extreme level and trying to control it. We're trying to control the chaos that is nature. And that can be a hard leap. And I think, for me, this, to turn back to our initial topic here, I think in general, it is going to be easier for our younger or newer hobbyists, younger not meaning like actual age, but I mean amount of time in the hobby, okay? To focus on 1 or 2 tanks and get those basics down rather than very quickly expanding, because you can have this horrible domino effect that happens where you expand, something goes wrong in one tank, and then all of a sudden things start going wrong in every tank. And it can be so depressing when that happens that it can shut a person out of the hobby for good. And I've seen this. I have seen this with a friend who used to live in the Seattle area. I think it was like within my first year of being on YouTube again and being kind of back in the hobby at like year 2. She was getting into a bunch of stuff. Her and her partner were like really into stuff. I think they were on like their 10th tank, right? And their biggest tank was like a 90-gallon. But most of the tanks were like 20 gallons to 40 gallons was kind of their sweet spot. They had a couple 40-gallon breeders, a couple 20 longs, like 110 and a big 90-gallon was their big tank. One thing started going wrong in a 40-gallon. And there was so much focus paid on that one tank that they missed something else in the little 10-gallon. And all of a sudden, got over here, kind of get distraught, trying to fix the problem over there. Something else went wrong. Then something else went wrong. And it was just like a domino effect. It hit effectively every tank but their one big discus tank. Because it was discus, they kept a really, really, really stringent routine on that tank. But every other tank, as they were trying to figure things out, went haywire on them. And eventually, after I think like 4 months, 5 months of fighting these problems, she just gave up. She got rid of every tank she could. It was hard for her to get rid of her discus until she finally was like going to move. And rather than break down the tank, move and put it back up, even though they're staying in the state, just rehomed the discus, broke the tank down, called it for good. Never came back. Never came back. That was like 4 years ago now. Never came back to the hobby. I still talk to her every once in a while and just seeing how she's doing. But it's like, yeah, no. Not interested in the hobby anymore. It's kind of sad because she was really interested. She was doing some shellies and some guppies and some discus, trying a bunch of different stuff, enjoying it, and then catastrophe hit, right? Zen Ginger, I just wanted a betta. But then my girls both wanted their own guppies. And then those bred and I needed more tanks. Yada yada. We ended up with 22 tanks. That's what you hope is like the constant success story, right? Paul Saltero, when I started accepting tank maintenance as a catch-all, the fish, drain the tank, scrub it down, rinse out the gravel, fill it back up, finally throw the fish back in. Sometimes it is a catch-all. Sometimes good maintenance is a catch-all for a lot of problems. All right. But that's kind of my little topic. It's a little admittedly rushed, but I saw this trend and I kind of maybe just want to talk about it. So We will move to question and answer at Bentley Pasco. It makes it super easy for me to see your questions. You can ask a question about freaking anything outside in aquatics. It always starts with a betta, I swear. I think that's true. I think a lot of people see bettas and they think like, oh, I see it in this little cup or whatever. It's so easy to like keep a betta, and maybe I get a small tank, and then you like start looking at other fish and well, these fish could go with my betta. Oh, and then, right? I mean, it's one of the things that was most appealing to me when I was out of the hobby for a period of time in college and afterward, is I would go past bettas in like even my local Petcos, and knowing that Petco and PetSmart are like not the best in my area typically, I would still see a betta and be like, man, I do like bettas. And I would always ponder like, maybe I could fit a little tank somewhere. But then eventually I would go like, no, because I won't be happy with just a little tank. Right? And then I'll have this domino effect until I like finally bought my home that I live in now. And you guys know that story, right? But yeah, it does start with bettas. Man, bettas catch so many people. Greg Jones, just saw your video about the convention you're in charge of, bud. Good luck. Should be fun. It's probably going to be a little out of the way for me, but hopefully it goes really, really well. I'll be watching the footage when it comes out eventually. 3 forces at play, driving people to nicer tanks. 1, aquaculture driving prices down, so it's hard to turn a profit breeding locally. 2, no one can afford to buy a house. 3, high utility costs. That's actually something I didn't think to discuss, is like as housing gets more and more ridiculous, it's hard to keep lots and lots of tanks in something like an apartment. It's much easier to keep like one nice tank for yourself. And often a lot of apartment complexes limit you to like 20 gallons or even sometimes 10 gallons or less in an aquarium. They won't care if somebody has like 15 cats, but heaven forbid you have more than like 10 gallons of water in a glass box. Yeah, I didn't even think to go that angle. That's actually a really good thing to think about too, is that for people that can't necessarily dedicate a lot of space in their home or don't have like a house or something like that, like you're living in an apartment, you just don't have as much room naturally, right? It kind of limits your ability to expand to lots and lots of tanks because there's only so much space. That's another really great talking point, Greg. Thanks, buddy. I appreciate that. Tony Adams, when you get a second, I was wondering if you had a sump, and if so, do you have, I think you mean refugium. I don't have any sumps actively running right now. I do own some sumps, and I have some larger tanks that will be, if I were to tear other tanks down and put those tanks up, they would be running those, or whenever I can get my garage finally done, then I will have tanks on sumps. And will I have a refugium? Kind of. So I do like the concept of having, if you have enough chambers in your sump, having a dedicated like plant refugium in the sump, especially if you want to use duckweed. And let me explain why. Duckweed, because it grows so fast and prolifically, actually can act like a kind of canary in the coal mine, so to speak, to warn you if you're having some kind of nutrition issue for your plants. Because duckweed is one of the very first plants that will struggle if something is out of whack in your tank. And so you'll see the duckweed having issues before it affects the rest of the plants in your main display. This is a trick that I learned from my friend Joel Corbus Oskin, right? He keeps duckweed specifically in a place housed away in his sump, and he uses baffles to prevent it from spreading so that he can use it to notice as a like early warning system if something is going wrong with the way that he is dosing nutrition in his plants or something like that. Yeah, Tony, I kind of assumed it was just an autocorrect on a phone or something, because autocorrect loves to turn words that I even spell correctly, and it's like, that's not the word you meant. Especially on my cell phone, man. But yeah, I like refugiums. Now, if you're doing it specifically just to keep extra plants, it depends. Like I don't care so much about that. I might keep different plants present in a refugium because of the fish that are kept up in the tank. It all depends. Or I might go completely like sans refugium if I don't want to have like the extra light and all that kind of stuff to deal with down in my equipment. I want it more simplistic and easy for myself. Also, there's ways that you can set up like the akin of a freshwater algae scrubber in your sump that will prevent algae from showing up in your main display and keep it localized to your sump and use it as a filtration medium, basically. There's some like real interesting tricks you can do using sumps just because of that extra water volume and space. And if they're nicely compartmentalized, there's lots of interesting things you can do from a like, that's a neat trick kind of way, as opposed to like just being purely a filter. Shamu aquariums. Another thing that knocks people out of the hobby is boredom. I've never quit the hobby because of it, but I'd stop buying new fish and hardly post fish videos. Yeah, I totally understand that. Like I even deal with that in some regards, and not necessarily boredom because I'm bored of my fish, but more like sometimes you get restricted, right? You hit kind of a maximum of number of tanks you can either take care of or fit in your home, or that your circuit breakers will allow, whatever that may be, right? And you might be really set on like, I really like these particular fish I have, so it becomes very hard to expand further because either the fish that you would be interested in aren't compatible with the other fish that you naturally keep, or just there's some other need to have completely separate tanks, or like then you would have to remove other fish. I haven't bought new fish in quite a while, other than like setting stuff up for brother-in-law James's tank and like the tank with my wife, because I slowly pared down enough stuff and moved things to my retirement tank. I don't buy new fish that often. I don't even buy new plants that often, but I kind of always have something that's relevant for a topic, although there is some kind of, I won't lie, there is some fatigue when it's like, what do you think of light number 342? Because there's just so many different lights that come out so frequently, especially anything that comes out of China, right? And that can be a little rough when it's like, I only have so much time to test all these things in depth, and I only have so many aquariums to slap them on, and eventually I don't want to have like 15 lights and 10 aquariums or something like that, where it's like I have more lights than I have aquariums. That seems like not so great. But I can understand that. Some people, there's like kind of a lethargy that can kick in, right? That makes you kind of like, I don't know, kind of got this, that going on. I'm going to focus on this other thing and just make sure that the fish tanks I have going are going okay and everything's healthy. Totally get that. Totally get that. Let's see here. Nabokov fan, what is the most important thing? Big highlight on most important. Understanding everything about water, or understanding everything else that comes into play. What is the biggest challenge as a newbie? I think actually understanding your water is probably the hardest thing. And let me explain why. I think there is a concept that becomes really hard for our newer hobbyists to like, they can understand and be like, no, well, I test my water all the time and I know what's in it. But understanding that like inherently in the back of your head, if you watch Bentley's in Seattle, his water is different than yours, period. So understanding that you need to take whatever bits of advice you garner from me and make small adjustments based on your own water, right? I think that's actually the hardest leap. Understanding like how your parameters are and like what testing looks like and how your water stabilizes and what that maintenance looks like to keep your water stable and what the general numbers are. I don't think that's as tough. I think it's as tough taking that inherent leap in the back of your head that you always go, okay, what's the water like here and what adjustments do I need to make for my tank, because my tank's water is this little bit different. And then tank number 2 I own is also this much more different beyond that tank number 1. And tank number 4 is this much different, right? Because even every tank in your home is slightly different water. A good follow-up question, Leo. What if you use RODI water to make it similar? It's still never going to be perfect. Even if you like fully RODI water and you're talking to somebody in Germany, right, who remineralizes to 4 degrees kHGH, you do the exact same. There are still some inherent small differences because RODI doesn't make it perfectly clear. There is some stuff still left in the water that will be different. And even if you go and like that tank is on RODI and that tank is on RODI and that tank is on RODI and I remineralize them all the same, there are tiny, tiny differences that happen because of the inherent chemistry that happens with the bacteria colonies that are in each aquarium. One aquarium might have more wood than the other, so that inherently introduces more humic substances and more breakdown, which means that it's going to produce more of those nitrogen compounds at a different rate than this tank over here that has only rock, right? Water, no matter how much we try to get like water perfect, all of our water is different. And that is where it's tough. That's where I think the toughest thing to truly understand comes into play. To me, I think that's part of the problem. Like, this is such a complex hobby when you really dig into it, that it's so easy for one thing to get out of balance, and then it makes everything else crazy, and it's like this crazy game of trying to figure out everything back in the right, so to speak, right? It's tough, but that's also part of what makes this hobby super interesting if you're kind of a science nerd, is that you get to dig into these things, get to understand them, and you get to enjoy nature in a very different way than just like maybe going out for a walk in a nice park or something, or like going to see a pond or a lake or whatever, right? My thoughts on it. It's perfect? No, but never said it was perfect. That's a good question. I like that question a lot. Paul Soltero, here's a question for the group. If you have a canister filter, do you have the intake and return on opposite ends of the tank, or do you have them right next to each other like a hob? Hang on back. I think it totally depends on the tank. So let me explain where I would do each, right? Because in Fallen Forest, I have them on the same side, but it's a 40 breeder, right? So I've got good depth, so I have them pretty well split apart because I'm trying to create that circular water flow like this, right? Inside the aquarium. Where I would change that, as long as I had the room to do so, is if I had a significantly longer tank. So like the retirement tank downstairs, on the far right-hand side is the outlet for my FX6, and on the far left-hand side is the inlet for my FX6. So it creates a slow water pull all the way across the tank. I think in longer tanks, it's good to have them on opposite sides to encourage that flow across the entirety of the tank. Tanks that are like 3 foot or less, I think that's where being on the same side and encouraging that like circular front to back flow to occur, where your water is going out, it's deflecting off of your glass, and it's kind of moving everywhere and eventually moving back toward the other side, toward your inlet, is where that's a little more effective. But that's personal choice. I think a lot of that's also personal choice. Are you trying to create more of a river system? You probably want them across from each other, right? You don't want the circular flow, you want straight flow. Do you want something that's more like a small lake or pond and you're going gentler flows? Same side, right? There's lots of little things you can do depending on also like your hardscape and your plant choices that can influence what is not optimal, but just the choice you decide to make to have things go well in your aquarium. I think it's very subjective. I don't think it's very objective about what is like the right answer there. I approach it like different in every single tank. It's totally about what I'm trying to pull off in that tank. Nathan, those who haven't seen in other chats, I have a mystery fry in my 50-gallon Australian Rainbows or Priscilla Tetra. I don't know, but it's mega tiny. I mean, you can You can probably tell by how it swims and eats whether or not it's a rainbow or it's a tetra. You'll know in like a month because tetras grow significantly faster than rainbows. So if it survives a month and it stays super tiny, rainbow. If it starts getting some body shape and you see obvious body shape within a month, most likely tetra. Rainbows are so weird. They don't get that like rainbow body shape for like a month and a half to 2 months. Cliff Andrews. I only have one aquarium, 100-gallon using RO water, a CO2 reactor, dry fertilizers, an FX5, and a 2-valve water change system. Oh yeah, and my $1,200 lighting. Holy moly! You must have a beautiful tank though. If you're rocking it like that, I'd love to see a picture of that, Cliff. I'd love to see a picture of it. Which, by the way, if anybody had a question that I missed earlier in chat, like feel free to repost it. Chat only lets me scroll back so far before it starts like going haywire on me. And I want to try and get this up. We've got a few minutes left. We got time to answer several questions, fish or not fish related. There was some other discussion, if you will, earlier. I believe Mr. Blake had mentioned he's more of a rum guy than a bourbon guy. Let me tell you, there are rum finished bourbons. Those are incredible. And we had a mention from the Zen Ginger about being more of a Scotch person. I'll answer that a little bit because I was trying to stay on topic. But I drink Scotch, but I typically only drink Speyside. Speyside are the ones that are more fruity. I don't like the stuff that tastes like a campfire. So if it's like super peaty, not my jam. Because that's the only thing I can taste. Just like in other whiskeys, I don't drink ryes because all I taste is like mint. I can't taste anything but the mint flavor in rye, so I tend to avoid it because it's just like every rye I've tried, and I've tried quite a few now, they're all just spearmint all day long, and that's it. Great for making a mint julep, not so great for like sipping solo. It's the weird part of the palate, man. Daniel McNamara. Top tips for someone who uses root tabs, CO2, liquid all-in-one for lots of light, and still manages to suck at keeping most plants alive. I guess it would be like, I'd have to know the particular problem that your plants encounter. And what I mean is like, do you see early yellowing? Is it because you're buying bunch plants and they're struggling to convert? Are we using, we're trying to do lots of Java Fern and that Java Fern just keeps struggling over and over again because it might not be the CO2 or some of the other things. There's lots of like little intricacies in plants when it comes to like those struggles. And honestly, like I would say, if you can, Daniel, shoot me an email. And your GH and KH do matter too. Here's my email, bentley.pasco@gmail.com. Boop. Put that in chat. Shoot me an email. If you can give me a few extra details, I'll be happy to try and help you out. Because it can be really tough. So like one of the things I would look at is look at your GH and KH. If one of them is like sub 4, that could be a problem. Or if it's really high, if you have like super high TDS, plants tend to like really soft water in general. That's where some plants can handle harder water, but if your water is really hard, that can be very difficult for plants to convert from like the way they're grown at farms to being a submerged grown plant. And that is one of the most common problems that I see a lot of people trying to do plants, because they're in harder water, and hard water is just really hard for mastering plants, sadly. But once you figure those things out, it's like the light bulb turns on. Is using equilibrium better than cutting your water with tap? Maybe. It would depend on what's actually in your water. So as an example, let us say that you have low TDS, but you have you're like in Washington, where basically the only thing in your water is iron. you still probably want a little bit of that equilibrium in there to give you some other mineral content or some other way to get extra mineral content in there. If you have crazy soft water that really has almost nothing in it and you're doing things otherwise, just cutting it down might be fine. But if you're running into problems where like your water keeps getting softer and softer, but the stuff coming out of your tap has some mineral content to it, you might be fine just having, water changes and bringing in that fresh water to cover you. There's a lot of different options is really what it comes down to. And what I would say is the big thing is, have you got your equilibrium dosing down? Because if you figured the equilibrium dosing out and you can keep it in equilibrium, then keep doing that. And don't stress about changing. High hardness and TDS might very well be the issue. Having issues with swords. Yeah, swords really like soft water. But one thing, also with swords, just as a heads up, they prefer less intense light over a long duration of time. Swords prefer long photo periods over high photo intensity. So that might also be the other issue. If you've got like really good lighting and you're coming in kind of like, I'm trying to do 6 hours of light and I've got strong intensity, it looks great, that can cause issues for certain plants, mostly swords, but also can cause problems with some of the other plants that are out there that tend to be in environments where they naturally get longer periods of time of slightly shaded or diffused light. No, hold on. There was one question earlier that I saw. Kingfisher Sketch. Don't believe I would ever leave the hobby. However, when my landlord told me I can only keep one 10-gallon aquarium, it rocked me. However, adversity leads to action most of the time. Yeah, man, when you mentioned that, I felt so bad for you because you've been spooling up some stuff and finally got a couple of fish you were really looking for, and then all of a sudden you got like sideswiped. Especially, it sucks because you've had fish there for a while, and getting sideswiped out of nowhere, just being told like, oh, you can't do the thing that you love. Like, ugh. Spellbreaker, tips for ponds in winter. So we've had some of the discussion in there. The biggest one, probably the biggest piece of advice is having water movement at the surface. This can be done a number of ways, but basically you're trying to prevent them from icing over. Now, if you have koi and goldfish primarily, they can actually handle that temperature dropping fairly low. But what you want to make sure is that you don't just leave the thing covered in ice the entire time, because then that's where oxygen becomes an issue. Even with their lower requirements, because like right as our fish's bodies, especially ones that can handle cold water temperatures, get colder and colder, their metabolism and their requirements slow down much, much more, and they don't really do as many things or need as many things. You still need oxygen, though, and a simpler bubbler is typically not enough. Usually you need something with a bit more oomph. That's why you'll see a lot of ponds that have like the little like fountain spray thing going on. Those are the ones that typically do relatively well even over winter, because that much water movement and it disturbs the surface enough that it prevents ice from forming. And that's probably the biggest thing about keeping your pond relatively healthy over winter. The second thing is definitely do not feed your fish over winter like you do in spring and summer, right? Their metabolism slows significantly down. They're not going to eat as much. You might be feeding every day in summer and spring and go to feeding like once a week in winter, maybe even less. Depending on the amount you're trying to feed or the amount of fish in there or the particular fish in there. Fish, as their metabolism slow down, need way less food. And if you feed way too much, it can actually cause spikes in like ammonia and nitrite, because as that water temperature cools down a ton too, you also have the bacteria colonies kind of going, nope. They go dormant, basically put, right? And some die off too. So you don't necessarily have the filtration capability. And even in a pond that has like a good like bog system, right, where you've got lots of plants, in winter, a lot of those plants aren't really doing as much work either, or they melt completely back until you get back to like your next summer again, right? So controlling your food is a big thing, and making sure oxygenation is good. Usually the easiest way is to make sure that you have lots of good surface agitation. You don't have to have like a river flow going or something crazy like that, but you just want to make sure that water is kind of continuously moving, more so than just like air-powered sponge, right? You need something a little more oomph to it to make sure it doesn't freeze over. Other than that, they're kind of a like wave your hand and forget about them. It's pretty simple to do a pond over winter. You just need that movement to make sure that like everything doesn't freeze, and that you keep the oxygen throughout the system. Whoa. And yes, in some, depending on the size of the pond, a bubbler can be enough. To be fair, you could have like one of the small Rubbermaid totes that's only like, 150 to 300 gallons. A bubbler's enough in that. But if you're talking like a larger pond, like, you converted maybe a swimming pool into a pond or something like that in your backyard, a larger water system, you usually want more than just like bubbles, because you need that movement across the entirety of the water surface. In smaller water systems, though, that can be okay. Or maybe you got like a little 30-gallon basket, like kind of the ones that like Master Breeder Dean has outside as an example. That could work. Johnny at Dance Fish. I run my lights from 7 a.m. to 10:30 p.m. Why don't I have algae? Balance. I have a number of tanks where I run lights for like 13 hours a day. And I know when things are getting out of whack because I start seeing algae. But otherwise, I never do. Hamza, what are the easiest fish for fresh water? I'm thinking about an aquarium with some fish, but I do not want to make mistakes. Guppies are relatively easy. I think Lady Diane mentioned that. Another fish that is relatively easy as a starter is something like white clouds. White clouds are pretty tough. They're pretty simple little fish. They don't even really need to be heated. You can also look into something like rosy barbs are another good one. Several of the barbs actually are pretty tough little fish. Not necessarily like, I wouldn't necessarily go to like, why is it, why am I forgetting these? The red and black ones that are small. Greg Sage breeds these things. I cannot remember of them. They're a great fish, but some of the slightly more, I guess you would say, like very active barbs. So like tiger barbs, the one that I'm forgetting because I'm a dummy right now. You might avoid some of those, but like some of the more chill ones, a little easier to do. Those are all kind of good starts. You can also look at like platies and mollies are fine too. A lot of your live bearers are actually a really good starter. Odessa barbs, thank you, Nabokov fan. Black ruby barbs, also a good option from Shamu Aquatics. One of my favorite kind of starter fish that I feel like is really not given enough love, even though I think they're really awesome, are some of the bigger body tetras. So like the Serpes and similar to that. They're usually pretty tough, but in general, I would go more toward like the live bearers. They're the easiest, I would say. And then some of like the rosy barbs are also really good. And white clouds. I love white clouds. I think white clouds are a great little fish. I have a bunch of them currently. I've kind of had them the whole time I've been back in the hobby. They're just great little fish. Daniel McNamara, have you seen any sea axelrodi in the U.S. recently? Yes. There's one person that has Chalatherina axelrodi in the U.S. One. That regularly breeds them. The problem is, whenever they sell, it's always at a kind of a hefty price tag, if you were to ask me. That would be Eric Bodrock, all Oddball Aquatics on Aquabid, and in fact, let's go see if he's got some up right now. He has them really regularly up on Aquabid. And I have been on the verge of pulling the trigger on them like 7 or 8 different times. But then I always like shudder away from the price or find something else that drags me more. He doesn't have them up right now, but he regularly has them up. They're getting tougher. They're getting tougher and tougher to find. I think part of it is like he's one of the few people that reliably keeps them, and because they are kind of an expensive fish, I think it shies a lot of people away from them. They're also kind of a bit of a butt when it comes to breeding, or so I've heard. We'll put it that way. Paul Soltero, the koi pond I had in Jersey in early winter, I removed the filter and just ran the pump. All the fish made it fine. All right, then. There you go. Yeah, you just need water movement. Really what it comes down to. So what is the most difficult fish in the world to keep as a pet? Octopus. Do you know why? Do you know why? Those things are so freaking smart, and they're escape artists. Even in professional aquariums, they escape their enclosures constantly. Constantly. They are a nightmare for a standard hobbyist to keep. Way, way worse than keeping some of the smaller sharks, any of the puffers. They're just a pain in the butt because they're so damn smart. Now, if we're going to look on the freshwater side, I would say probably the hardest to keep, mostly because they're so impossible to get a hold of and survive, would be the cross river puffer. But you're talking about a fish that is easily $1,500 US or more because it's so hard to get out. Cuttlefish is another very hard one to keep. Greg makes an excellent point. Cuttlefish can get scared very easily, and if they ink, they literally like nuke their own tank. Yeah. A lot of your ink-based saltwater things are very hard. If you really want an adventure, like as Lady Diane is saying, go look up octopus escaping on YouTube. You will find armies of videos, various things from professional aquariums of all sorts of things that are put into place to prevent them from getting out, and they still find a way out because they're so smart. And, they're just interesting animals. They're interesting animals, and we all want to try and keep them because they're so interesting, and yet they're nigh suicidal because they're so curious and just want to get out of their enclosures all the time. Octopus is good in a vinaigrette. Hey, man. I went out to a restaurant in Seattle recently with a friend to kind of celebrate my new job. It's not super expensive or anything, but I had 2 options, and one of them was grilled octopus, and I got really tempted. But then I decided that the Korean barbecue glazed pork belly sounded better. It was a little more indulgent as a celebration thing, so I went that route. What do you want from me? And it was super good, let me tell you. Which means I'm probably going to go back and try the octopus, because it was the other tempting thing, and with how good that was. Whoo boy. There was a cross river puffer at ACA for sale at $350. There's no way that was a real cross river at that price. I mean, one of the people who regularly comes in, Preston John, kind of I like to jokingly call him the puffer god of the United States, because he's one of the few people that cracked the code on reliably and sustainably breeding the spotted Congo puffer, right? And he's also just an awesome dude, and he kind of thinks it's hilarious and embarrassing whenever I call him that. He's been trying to get crossover covers for like the last, I don't know, 4 or 5 years. And it's just been a nightmare because there's so few that come into the United States, because there's so few expeditions. Because unfortunately, the place where you catch them is very war torn right now along the Congo River, and it's a real shame, to be honest. But yeah, man, that's interesting. Okay, so we are close to the end here. What else can we do? We had some discussion. There was also a mention of 1910 of Old Forester. I'm a big fan of Old Forester 1910. That is quite delicious. Basically anything Old Forester. Old Forester you never go wrong with Old Forester. If you're a bourbon fan, you basically can't go wrong, unless for some reason you don't like that kind of like funky banana note that it has. You can flip them for 500, I bet. You're definitely not getting healthy fish yet. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. That's the thing. Lumpy Dog, thank you. Yeah, it's been interesting. So I can actually I leave you with that. So the company that I started for this week, that'll be the last thing I talk about, is this really interesting company that is all about, you might generically say metaverse stuff, but I don't think that's accurate. But basically kind of making these cool 3D immersive experiences, and kind of building game type stuff for it too. But it's been really interesting because they're a small startup and they're doing very, very well. And I'm kind of really looking forward to digging into some of the potential that their platform can bring to people. And as I get more details, I'll give you guys more and more, and I'll tell you the exact name of the company I work for and things like that. But I want to get a little sunk in first and really get my teeth into things before I start talking about that stuff. Ashley Sly, actually, okay, I'll answer this question because it's not fish related, but I like it. Why choose testing as a career rather than software development? Good question. So I was originally I took coding classes and did a small coding program and was thinking about becoming a developer. What I found is that as a tester and as a quality assurance person, I get to activate a part of my brain that's really into being very sleuthy and investigative. And I kind of constantly get to do that while also being an advocate for a customer and being more in their shoes, worrying less about the product is designed to do X, and we designed it so that you would do this, then this, and then this, and then this. And I was joking with one of my developers in a meet and greet earlier today. It's we get a product, we often design it from a development perspective of you take action A, then B, then C, then D. And a tester immediately goes in, that's cool. I'm going to do A, banana, Z, right? And just completely break the flow that you want. Because deep down, our goal is to put our feet into the shoes of a standard user. And users so rarely do exactly what developers think they're going to do. And I really enjoy the impact that I can have on a user experience and product quality from the testing side, playing that puzzle solving game, if you will, right? Finding the weird things, as opposed to trying to design and implement. I would be more interested, I probably in hindsight, right? I've been in this career for 13 years, so I've been doing this for a while. If I were to go in a development route, I would be more of a game design person, because I like the concept of designing things. I don't necessarily like sitting and hammering out lines of code. I'm a much more social individual. So that interaction of finding and breaking things, as I like to joke, my job is break things for a living, right? And then going in and talking with people and figuring out how we make this better, taking user feedback, looking at those kind of things. And yeah, I enjoy being a nuisance. I like breaking things, and maybe the best example of this is perhaps the greatest compliment I think I've ever received about my career had nothing to do with my job. So a friend of mine that I know that I used to play Dungeons and Dragons with, right? I randomly ended up applying for a job as a contractor under a team that he was in charge of. But he had nothing to do with my hiring, except for one part. So the PM in charge of the contract role and in charge of the entire team went to this guy and asked him about me, right? And he said the following. He said, Bentley is the perfect min-maxer. And my PM contractor boss at the time looked at him like, I don't understand what you're saying. And he goes, if there is a way to exploit or break a system, he will find it. Hire him. And from that person, I've known this guy for 15 years. He is a good friend of mine. I knew him before he had kids. I know his wife really well. To get that, to me, it was like a high compliment, because in the test realm, our job is to try and break the system, right? We want to walk down all the things you intend something to do, but then we also want to do all the things you didn't think it should do and try to break it so that we can make things better quality for the end user and find those problems before they ever go out in the wild. I love that part of my job. I love that part of my job. It is very fun when I get to see things that could have slipped past, find them, and make improvements. And know that when whatever I'm working on goes out to our intended customer, that I had impact in making it better for them. I love that part of my job. So that's why. That's why I'm a tester and not a developer. I like breaking things for a living. All right. Gang, I want to thank you all so much on this very hot. Some of you were out in like 108-degree weather, etc., etc. Thank you for joining me on this hot summer Tuesday evening. I look forward to seeing you all next week. Same bat time, same bat channel. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and stay awesome. Woo!